Well, hello, friends of the European spirit. You will have heard of Joseph Campbell, who counts as perhaps the most important popularizer of mythology in the 20th century, who made accessible to everyone the hero story and who reminded everyone, as it seems in the modern world, of the importance of the hero, of the arcane, of the archaic, and hence also of myth in general. But I beg to differ. I think that Joseph Campbell was more destructive than a force for good, and here is why. Now, if you think of Joseph Campbell's most important work, that might be The Hero with a Thousand Faces. And in it, Joseph Campbell presents what he calls the mono myth. Let me just say before I even begin on the mono myth that Joseph Campbell was hugely influential on George Lucas and on Star Wars. And there's a reason for that. If you watch Star Wars, obviously, what you see is a sort of pastiche of all kinds of different stories. Luke Skywalker is a heroic figure who might be Apollo, but also Jesus Christ. And we can see that George Lucas perhaps worked with some of the patterns that Campbell believed to have recognized in every single hero story across the globe that he collected and compared. Now, if we just consider the term mono myth, we find a certain similarity to monoculture. And I believe that this is, in fact, what Campbell's work leads to. It is perennialism on steroids, hence it doesn't actually see any difference. Yes, there are 1,000 different faces, but ultimately what it all can be broken down to is that one fundamental structure, which he outlines quite succinctly very early on in The Hero and the God, which is chapter 3. And in it he says that the hero leaves the world just on an ordinary day and looks for a realm of supernatural wonders and just has to withstand certain tests. So let's read the quote. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. And he actually draws a little cycle how the hero moves from X to Y to Z and back again. So it's all perfectly patternized, everything is perfectly formulaic, and you can find this pattern afterwards everywhere. And of course, he's all too content admitting that some of the hero stories don't follow every single step that he has seen, that he wants to see, but still, ultimately, you can all break it down to this one quote-unquote archetype. So again, here's the quote. A hero ventures forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. Fabulous forces are there encountered, and a decisive victory is won. The hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. Now, if we think of Odysseus, for example, Odysseus does not venture forth from the world of common day into a region of supernatural wonder. He ventures forth to Troy. That is how the journey begins. There's no supernatural wonder in Troy. There are the gods, but the gods are everywhere in the Greek world. They are present in the world. Nothing supernatural or nothing wonderful about them. The gods are present in the house, in the oikos, in Ithaca, just as much as they are present in the battlefield of Troy. So there are no fabulous forces are encountered anywhere in the Iliad. That's bogus, so that's not the case at all. And the hero comes back from this mysterious adventure with the power to bestow boons on his fellow man. Now, of course, we could say that if we reduce the Odyssey to just the so-called adventures, of which Odysseus tells, for example, that he encounters the Cyclops, who are a race of barbaric shepherds who, for some reason, are chosen by the gods, and who may or may not be related, by the way, in the Odyssey to the other mythical cyclops that make the flashes, that produce the flashes for Zeus. Though it's not clear whether they're actually related, whether they're the same or not. And of course, you could think of Circe or of Calypso, but Calypso is a nymph. Circe is a nymph or a goddess, and so again, there's not supernatural wonder that would be out of the common. Now we can say, of course, that it sounds to us as strange and as supernatural, and yes, we might say that they didn't encounter Calypso in their everyday life, but the world was full of gods. Not perhaps to a 20th century man, but in the ancient world, yes. So these stories, these myths, aren't something that is separated from the melange of the everyday, from that dreariness and that ever sameness in which we live. And then we need something supernatural on top of it, which we get, if we're honest to ourselves, by watching superhero movies, etc. No, the world is full of the divine, and they have a way of understanding their myths as actually showing how the divine and the mortal or the human are interlaced, interwoven at every step. Yeah. And so I'm not certain that Odysseus, upon his return, bestows boons on his fellow man. I mean, he loses every single one of his men. Now, we can debate whether Odysseus is to blame for that, or whether he is not to blame for it, because so he does get them in danger, yes, in the land of Polyphemus, of the Cyclops. He does get them in danger. He endangers them perhaps on Circe's island, and he does, but he doesn't get them in danger. He doesn't endanger them when his fellow men, those that are still left, choose to slaughter the cattle of Helios, the sun god, and eat them and feast on them, which was prophesied they shouldn't do, and if they did, they know they will die. So they're in defiance of the gods, and hence they're punished. So that's not necessarily, we can't necessarily blame Odysseus for it. But still, does he bestow boons on his fellow man? He comes home disguised as a beggar. He has to kill the suitors to install some sort of order again. And yes, he restores order, but that's not some wonderful, fabulous thing he brings home from his magical journey that he took. So even just looking at Odysseus, we see that the outer journey, this formula of adventure, as he might call it, is not present in one of the fundamental hero stories of Europe. But of course, he doesn't stop there, because in his, let's just say, I'm sorry to say, but in his very American ways, he is looking for a way to monoculturalize everything, to monocultivate. It is ultimately the psychology of the McDonaldization of the world is present here in Campbell. Campbell McDonaldizes, if you give me that, he completely homogenizes myth. Everything becomes the same and interchangeable. And hence you also get this hodgepodge of Star Wars. It's Lucas, so he wasn't officially employed by Lucas, but Lucas read this work, and maybe others by Campbell. They were friends apparently as well. And so there was influence, let's say, on Star Wars. And as we can see, Star Wars won't hold up as a story. And in a few years from now, people will say, why was this ever popular? And that has to do with, of course, global liberalism, that monoculture of liberalism having run its course, because we now have seen where it leads. And Campbell is part of it. It's part of that neoliberal program that wants to turn the planet into a monoculture. This is ultimately the equivalent of a shopping mall. Which hero are you shopping for today? And it works to a certain extent because it triggers some very, how reduced we already are in our being, in our ways. That's why it works on us, or at least some of us, unfortunately maybe the majority of people. But in fact, even just looking at Odysseus, we can see that the formula of the outer journey doesn't hold up. So then there's the inner journey, or the cost of growth, as we might put it. The agony of, this is a quote from Campbell again, the agony of breaking through personal limitations is the agony of spiritual growth. So these three stages, I should mention, are separation, initiation, and return. And they're always the same: separation, initiation, and return. Now, I'll say a few words maybe on Beowulf and Odysseus and Dante in a second. But to say, for example, that Odysseus, it just suffers the agony of breaking through personal limitations, as if this were some sort of self-help program, is, to me, it's fascinating to me that this, because what Campbell turns out to be is the mythologian, the mythologist of the technological framing of the world, as Heidegger might put it. And I might put it a bit differently. It is the mirage, the eidolon, the shadow image, the mere shadow image of memory. There's this supposed collective memory of all the great hero stories, which turn out to be the perfect same everywhere, which is also quite subversive if you think about it, because it strips everything from its uniqueness. Its uniqueness is stripped from everything, and what you're left with is just a scaffolding or a mere structure that then can be replicated again and again and again for the sake of, quite obviously, Hollywood movies, to be programmable in terms of profit maximization and audience outreach. Once that monoculture is established, you also get the mono hero and the mono myth, etc. This crowds out the beauty of multiple divinities, of multiple gods, and hence actually is a direct attack on genuine dialogue and intercultural exchange and dialogue and discourse and debate, claiming that everything is already the same. The Buddha is the same as Jesus, etc. Nothing out of the ordinary with Jesus. They have to leave. They're not being kicked out, by the way. They're not refugees. I don't know where that nonsense comes from. Mary and Joseph have to leave because there's a census and they have to get counted, and that's fine. So they leave. Jesus never leaves. He just runs around where he knows everyone and everyone knows him, until they get a bit sick of him. I don't know, who's Jesus separated from? I can't think of it now. Who's he separated from? His mother? No, that never happened. How is he initiated? He gets baptized. How does he return? Where does he return to? Heaven? Is he separated from God? Is that the story? So you can see you can make anything fit into this, because, and it's actually really, I have to say, it is quite ingenious, but it is also just producing a monoculture, and I think ultimately purposely so. Yeah. So it's how it works structurally. There's sameness, or there's the archetype. And then from that archetype, you get 1,000 faces, the so-called nuance. Yeah. So I'm looking over my notes now, and that is, he wouldn't want to see it as a rigid formula. So he actually pushed back on this, Joseph Campbell, to be fair to him. Yeah, he does acknowledge that there can be stages that happen out of order, and that some stories focus entirely just initiation, while others focus on the return, etc. But still, for him, they are the same because they're maps of the human psyche, and the human psyche to him is the same everywhere. And that in itself is a monocultural view. It's the view of Gleichschaltung. It's the view of homogenizing the planet, of making it flat. To flatten the earth is the urge of the last man, der Erdfloh, as Nietzsche says in Zarathustra. So let's consider Beowulf. Yes, he leaves. And however, we need to understand that the Beowulf is and there's a reason why, for example, the medieval, very often Germanic myths do not have that same universal claim that, for example, the Homeric epics have, because they are very Germanic ultimately. Yeah, and they sort of died with their time. We can still read them, but they do not speak to us as much as Odysseus' attempt to get home do. It's a doom-laden Germanic tale of fate, of weird, yeah, which is, by the way, where you get, of course, the word weird from in modern English. And I think the word weird even, of course, means fate in Old English as well. And he dies in a very tragic manner, and in his struggle against the dragon. So how is that the same as Odysseus? Not a glorious return home, but a return home, a fulfilled nostos. The kairos is fulfilled. He returns home. He restores order at home. There's no doom. And it's a universal story, the Odyssey, because it is about restoring order. Beowulf isn't. Now let's look at Dante's Divina Commedia. Yeah, a very deep, so on the surface, deeply Catholic. And of course, there's some personal issues that Dante has and his exile, etc. But Dante doesn't return home, or doesn't return. There's no initiation. What the Divina Commedia is about is ultimately, on the surface, I would say, is a theological, or is a poetic justification for the goodness of God and the justice of the division between heaven and hell, that both must be of necessity. That there are other layers to this, I won't go into here, but there is a sort of a esoteric layer to it, which may have to do with Dante not trying to justify existence as a divine comedy, but perhaps trying to tie the Christian European world, the Christianized European world, to the ancient world, being explicitly guided by Virgil, etc. But that's for another time to discuss. And so even just looking at a few myths the way I just did, I think we can show that the monocultural view of the monomyth is mistaken. And it doesn't even work. And it's a cop-out by Mr. Campbell to say, well, some stories skip entire stages. Stages happen out of order. But still, ultimately, what matters is the formula. Because once you have the formula, now you can produce Star Wars. Now you can produce all of these movies that always have the same pattern, which helps with the viewership which helps sort of improve the reaction by the viewers, because they're sort of now expecting the ever same story to be told again and again, which is what? Let's go back. Separation, initiation, and return. Think of how many Hollywood movies work on that specific formula or pattern. And that, I think, is the real pattern. It is the Americanized monoculturalization of the world. And this is what Campbell sort of, he's just holding up a mirror to himself, as it were, to his psyche, to the American psyche, that can only go out into the world and turn everything into part of its grand shopping mall. And this sort of metaphysical supermarket that we find here is one that has to be pushed back tremendously. Because on the one hand, he is the mythologist, or the mythological apologist, if you like, of technological framing, to stay with Heidegger. And on the other hand, I would say that what he does is he and so his theory, or his worldview, and whoever uses it for whichever movie production, etc., it allows to generate some sort of memory, a sort of a memory particle, as a mere format that has the mere appearance, the eidolon, a shadow image of memory, of, let's just say, of deep cultural memory, to put it like that, to make myself perhaps clearer if I speak in ordinary parlance. And so that is now produced, and this gets confused then with what? With the actual memory, which is found in the text, and which have to be retrieved again and again and again by every generation, if they, and it is only alive as long as, and comes alive as long as, we give, to paraphrase book 11, to borrow from book 11 of Homer's Odyssey, if we give our own blood to that memory and let those spirits rise again and let them speak to us on their own accord, in their own way, and not in their own right, and not by making them fit into this Procrustes bed of this pseudoscientific, of this scientistic model that Campbell has produced. So thank you very much for listening. If you enjoyed this video, make sure that you like and subscribe. And also, if you'd like to read some real philosophy, take one of my courses at the Halcyon Philosophy Academy. Thank you very much indeed.